welcome to another episode of Our World, Our Power radio show. Here with Lady Pauline,
Glenn Greenwich.
And of course, your attorney at war, Stephen G. James.
Stephen. I have missed you. You haven't been here for about 3 weeks. I know you've been very busy. What have you been up to?
Oh, I've been counting. It's actually been 2 Saturdays.
There's 2 Saturdays.
Which I guess is 3 weeks. This is the 3rd week, right? But 2 Saturdays, just to be clear. I was away doing a very heavy criminal trial in Queens criminal courthouse where a young man was facing substantial jail time as well as deportation, fines, etc., if convicted.
Wow.
And I know you very seldom ever lose a case. You are definitely an attorney at war.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate you pointing that out. I haven't lost a trial, criminal or civil, and we do a lot of them. You know, we do criminal cases, we do civil cases, we do all types of matters for people, and we have not lost one of those, not nary a one, as my grandma would say, in 25 years. Somebody said to me, oh, in 25 trials? No, in 25 years, since the year 1994.
That's awesome. Now, how do you attribute your success? What do you feel that has made you a successful attorney, that you have only maybe lost 3 trials in all the years that you've been practicing?
Yes, in 32 years we've lost 3 trials and 0 since 1994 in the past 25 years. At the base of it is my belief and trust in God. I let God be the guiding light to victory, to see our way, my clients, and my way out of the abyss, out of the knots and tangles that the criminal justice system can put one in, the quagmire of looking for justice for the client. And I let God be the guide. But also, you know, we work harder to serve our clients better. What do I mean when I say that? I learn my cases. I learn the client. I even learn, when possible, the complaining. You know, the person who's making the claims. What are they all about? Who are they? And all of that comes into play throughout the course of a trial. I learn something new with every trial, although I've done hundreds and hundreds, and some of them are documented in the book, And Justice for Some, the Story of Stephen G. James, written by Hugh Griffith. But others, you know, I've done many, many trials. Yet each time out, there's something new that I learned, both in the law and in the fact patterns.
Okay.
So there's something that you said earlier in terms of getting prepared. So how do you prepare yourself for trial?
Well, I give the time to the client. The answers to many of the cases, the key is to understand and know your client. Know what makes that person tick, what they're all about. Also, know your fact patterns. Get to really understand how this case and the laws that the district attorney's offices, for example, in a criminal case, will be applying to try and prosecute your client. And I dissect everything. I put the time in. I spend hours and hours researching the law and speaking and spending time with the client, and in some instances with the client's families, just so that I understand who the person is. So when I go into that battle, into that trial, I am him and he is me, and I am advocating as the attorney, but also as the accused.
Something that interests me, you told me this a long time ago, that you used to work for the prosecution.
Correct. When I was in law school,
Yeah.
I had the idea that I never wanted to be a prosecutor as a career. I never wanted to be a lifelong prosecutor, what they call a career prosecutor.
Okay.
But I also realized, in order to be able to fight that Goliath, which is supported by our tax dollars, by the power of the state, the power of the government, and in some instances the federal government, because we do federal trials too, I knew I had to learn the underpinnings of Goliath. So what did I do? I joined the prosecution as soon as I left law school early, back in 1986. I graduated a year almost ahead of my class. And then I had to take a day off to go back and graduate with my class.
Mm-hmm.
However, I joined the prosecution in the Kings County District Attorney's Office. I was an assistant Kings County DA, and I wanted to learn some of the ins and outs of prosecution cases, what makes good cases, what type of evidence do they bring, what type of tricks do they play, when they might be bluffing. I wanted to learn all of that so I can then utilize that in my arsenal as a criminal defense attorney, which was always my proclivity, my aim, my goal.
Since you
My
are,
calling.
yes, Stephanie, I know you're an expert, and there's a few things that's been coming up in the last few months, and I want to discuss it with you.
Yes.
The Central Park jogger,
Right.
that case is up
Howard
again.
Beach?
In Howard Beach, yes, and also Atlanta, Georgia, with the children that has been murdered.
The Wayne Williams
Wayne
matter?
Williams.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes.
But you don't mean Central Park, you mean the one in Queens, Howard Beach case? The jogger trial that was in Queens recently?
Yeah, that too.
Not the Central, oh, you mean the Central Park?
I
from-
mean the
from-
Central Park,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Because,
The 7 young men in Manhattan?
Yes.
Okay.
Right,
Yeah.
because what happened is that their case was being reviewed just recently. I saw it on the news, and they are now, of course, out of jail, and they're suing the city for, all the time that they spend in prison.
Defamation of character, right?
And wrongful prosecution.
Yeah.
Yes.
One of the things about that case, if I may interject, is that these, I think it was 6, I said 7, 6 young men were all minors, 15
Right,
and
yes.
younger when
Yes.
they were arrested. Some as young as 13, 14, 15, 16. None of them were afforded the rights that are afforded and accorded parents of minors who are arrested. What do I mean when I say that? In each of those cases, the parents came to the local precinct where the children were being held, asked the desk sergeant, who they now call an information officer in the precinct, is my child here? Is XYZ here? They were either told a lie, no, your child is not here, or your child had been transferred to somewhere else, central booking, downtown. They were given diversions so that the detectives and investigators had that much more time with the children to try and get confessions. And while that might be utilized for adults, if your parent comes down and you're over 21 or over 18 years old, they don't have to let them in with you if you're an adult.
Correct.
We have special laws to protect children.
The minors.
Right,
Yeah.
minors, from that type of police interrogation. If the parents come in, if an attorney comes in and says, hey, I represent young man Joey, minor Bob, minor Tom, Timmy, and I want to speak to him, why don't want you speaking to him until I speak to him? The law says you have to let that happen. Even if it's an adult, an attorney says, don't speak to my client until I speak to him, they have to cease talking with the client. But in this case, in the Central Park jogger case, that wasn't accorded to the children nor the parents. None of the parents were able to speak with their children until after the police completed their interrogations.
After they completed.
Correct. And gotten confessions, as we now know, as you pointed out, they're
Yes.
suing false confessions in many instances. And, that's the type of problems that, among others, that were ripe in this particular case, in this Central Park jogger case that took place, some 20 years ago now.
But how can a case go so wrong because they found the person that did it and it was one person? So how does one person, add up to 6 people?
That's a wonderful question. That case came along at the time when DNA was still a new tool in the arsenal of, I guess, both the defense and the prosecution, but primarily in prosecutors' arsenal. They never matched, obviously, any of the children's DNA, any of the boys' DNA with the DNA that was found either on or around or inside the victim. Never matched it to them.
So
It was a foreign DNA.
So the evidence was always circumstantial.
Circumstantial and based on false, as we now know, false confessions
Right.
that were elicited
Right.
or extracted, if you will, by any means necessary by these adult police over these children.
Well, again, they understand how to interrogate someone, and they ask
They're
questions.
trained.
Yeah, they're trained to do
Mhm.
that. And so, as a young person, what would you recommend for a teenager if they get arrested? What are their rights that they have to protect themselves?
Well, first of all, specifically, you mean a minor when you say teenager,
Yes,
under 18?
Yeah, a minor.
A minor should never speak to the police at all, and this is true of anyone, but since you say specific, you're asking about minors, they should never speak to the police other than pedigree, your name, your address, your phone number. I want to speak to my parent, or I want to speak to my lawyer. That's it.
Okay.
Now, under the Constitution, the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, the Supreme Court has held once someone requests an attorney or says, I do not want to speak with you, all questioning has to stop, and anything that's elicited after that point is not usable at trial.
Okay.
Okay? Now, of course, there's an honor system. Of course, the cop's going to come in and say, well, he did say he didn't want to speak to me, but I kept talking to him, and this is what he said after that. That very rarely happens. But in theory, it's once the person says, I don't want to talk to you anymore, or I want to speak to an attorney, all questioning is to cease and desist until that happens. Now, in the case of a minor in particular, they can ask for their parent as well, as a lawyer or a lawyer, and the questioning is supposed to stop. But in this case, that didn't happen. I don't know if the children actually asked for parents, but also here's another twist in that law. If the parents show up at the precinct with or without an attorney, the parents can say, don't question my child,
Right.
my minor child. Can't be done if it's a majority person, if it's someone over 18. But for a minor, a parent, doesn't have to be a lawyer, can say, do not question my child. I want to see my child.
Right. Right.
All of that happened according to all the parents, because the parents found out about their children being arrested in the Central Park case from neighbors, not from the police.
Wow.
So they all ran, the ones who were contacted ran to the precinct. As it turns out, we later learned the children all were there at the same time the parents were asking for them, but they were diverted either to Central Booking, which was 100 Center Street at the time and still is, or told that they would transfer somewhere else, but they're not here. Because the information officer, or the desk sergeant as they were previously known, didn't tell the truth. Didn't want to say, yes, your child is here, and therefore we have to stop what's going on in that room back there.
Right. Right.
So as parents, we need to know the laws to protect our children.
Absolutely. I would say everybody needs to know laws. If you are a parent, if you're a single person, if you're walking this earth, but in particular in this city, try to know your laws, because you can avoid a lot of hassle and headache if you know the laws, especially the laws around traffic stops, which is usually the time and the most common way that the police come into interaction with the citizenry.
Let me ask you this. When they ask you, can I search your car? You can say no.
Correct.
And that will stop them from...
You can refuse an unlawful or unjustified warrantless search of your car and of your person and of your home. Yes.
You know, that's so strange, because you know where I live. I live on Sutton Boulevard. And
my office is on Sutphin as well. So I know Sutphin.
I see a lot of stuff going on, and I see people being pulled, out of their car, physically pulled out of their car, and the police are searching the car. And I hear them say, because I can stand on my terrace and I can hear, and I'm, they'll say, no, I don't want my car searched.
I do not consent to this search.
And I see them still go ahead
and violate the rights of the person against unlawful search and seizure.
Now, is that something that's just done in certain neighborhoods?
Fourth Amendment. To my knowledge, I've only heard of it, and I've been practicing for 32 years, as you pointed out, it happening only in certain neighborhoods. I don't see that happening on, let's say, near Gracie Mansion or Madison and 72nd near the Ralph Lauren store, or Fifth Avenue and 32nd Street near the Empire State Building, etc. I don't see it happening in those areas. Down in the Village, today's Village, West 4th Street, 6th Avenue, I don't see that happening. I do see it happening in communities of color, however, where people's rights, 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment rights are routinely trampled upon. Correct.
I was told that if you ask the officers, am I free to go? Because from what I understand, they will question you in a friendly manner, as if they're just having a nice conversation, but they're actually part of their interrogation. If I ask, am I free to go, that sets them up to let you know that no, you can't, or yes, you can. And now, of course, if they say that you're not free to go, then why am I being held?
If the police tell you, if you say, am I being detained or am I free to go? And they say yes, then go. Don't answer any more questions, pick up your ball and leave the park. If they say, no, you're not free to go, you are being detained, then you tell them, why am I being detained? Because it has to be a reasonable suspicion. That's the standard to detain you. If they don't answer that, then you tell them, well, in that case, I don't wish to answer any further questions. And if you have any questions for me, read me my rights. And then you stand on those, what they call Miranda warnings, or your Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination.
Your question, Glenn, have been standing, a lot of times I'm standing by the movie theater on Jamaica Ave, and I see...
That would be on Parsons and Jamaica Avenue.
Yes, Parsons and Jamaica. And I see how they stop cars, and then they ask the driver for their driver's license. Is that legal?
Now, what I think you're referring to, because I've seen that too, are the illegal livery drivers that go up and down Jamaica Avenue, peeping their horn, stopping people, trying to solicit business.
No, I've seen actually ordinary people in their car. They have pulled over a friend of mine, and she was from out of town, and I think she made a turn that she wasn't supposed to.
Oh, well then you've answered your own question. If you make an illegal turn...
But she didn't know it was illegal.
Oh, well,
Doesn't
ignorance
matter.
of the law is not an excuse. If you make an illegal turn, you're now opening the door to be stopped by the police. They have every right to stop you for, and to use your word, illegal turn.
Okay.
But if I thought you were speaking of, because I've seen this, anyone who's making an illegal turn, turns without blinking, signaling, etc., you're opening the door. You're giving the police probable cause to come in and stop you. However, I've seen them stop people who are driving straight, making no turns, but who are unlicensed livery drivers, because they promulgate the landscaping of Jamaica Avenue. They're up and down all the time, and they all have the same type of cars, like those Impalas, you know?
Yes.
And, they stop those guys because they're not supposed to be soliciting fares along Jamaica Avenue.
Even with a livery.
That's how they
plate?
stop them. Yeah, with a TLC plate.
Okay.
They're supposed to, either you're an Uber where you're called, and then you have the paraphernalia of an Uber, which if the police stop you, you can show them.
Right.
Or your livery, which means you work at a station and you have to be called, and liveries can't pick up fares along Jamaica
anywhere.
Avenue. Well, you can pick up a fare if the person calls you to a
Right.
spot.
Yes.
But you can't go like a bus.
Like randomly.
Yes,
go along a line
correct.
and just pick people
As you
up
drop
and
somebody
them
off, you're waving other people to get in. They know you're not being called,
Okay.
and that's illegal.
Oh, very
And that you see that a lot up there too.
Yes, it does
And you'll
happen
see
all the
that
time.
and then usually it's TLC who's stopping them. It's the police agent that the Taxi and Limousine Commission has that stops these people also. That's who you see in the unmarked vans and all that, stopping delivery drivers. It's not NYPD, so to speak. It's the TLC.
Right.
Also, something that I was heard recently about Atlanta, the kids that have been missing and was murdered, and they feel that the person that went to jail is not the person that committed these crimes. They haven't found them yet.
Lady Pauline, that has been the cry of many. I mean, I remember I was not a little boy, but a young teenager when that happened. When the murders were going on, I think I was 9 or 10 when they arrested Wayne Williams for the trial.
I never understood that either.
Yeah, I was like 13 and I didn't believe it then. And
Right.
I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't even out of high school yet, or even in high school probably. And I remember thinking,
Strange.
they
Right.
just grabbed this kind of like 21-year-old guy out of his bedroom who's kind of like a hermit, loner type of guy. If PlayStation and those things existed then, he's probably one of those guys who only played PlayStation or was on Facebook all day, never going outside of his house.
Yes,
Right.
true.
You know, so he did whatever they did back in those days, absent those diversions, but he was a loner. Everybody that knew him talked about that. Even the police talked about that. However, he was also a very easy suspect because he had had a history of, you know, being around children and strange, quote unquote, strange behaviors, what they called it. But no evidence, and we didn't have DNA
But he was
back
never,
then.
but he was never prosecuted for any,
For any of the murders.
strange behavior
By the
prior
way,
to.
he was never prosecuted. You're right. He was none of the quote unquote strange behavior amounted to criminality.
Right.
So he was never prosecuted. But furthermore, he was never, and this is one of the little known facts about that case, he was never convicted of quote unquote the child murders. He was convicted of murdering 2 adults, a 20 and a 21-year-old.
Yes, you're right, that's true.
Even though his case came under the banner of the Atlanta child murders. In fact, when they talk about his case, they call it the Atlanta
Yeah,
child
Child
murders.
Right.
But not one child's murder was ever solved. And some people, because he was not convicted of it, he wasn't even tried for them.
Wow.
But he was grouped with that because that made it easy for the Atlanta police to tuck that whole investigation away. Some people have speculated that it was probably either the KKK, who at the time was strong and now is making a resurgence again, but at that point was strong and active in Atlanta, in Georgia. And they attributed to some activities by the KKK. Just like you have these young women now who are missing. Nobody talks about it on the mainstream news, but there are thousands, literally with a T and an S at the end, of young women of color, Latina and African American, as they're called, women who are between the ages of 9 and 18 turning up missing. If you even go on Facebook, you'll see people now posting, you know, she's been missing for a week, she's been missing for a month, she's been missing for 6 months on Facebook. But no one's covering those stories in the mainstream media.
Why do you think that is? Not just because of the color, but why do you think it's just being swept underneath the rug? Why?
Well, 2 things that happens, especially in government. If they can't get a linchpin or something that they can start picking at the scab and getting to uncover the problem, they don't like to talk about it if there's nothing there that they can do about it. The second thing is, it is color. You know, when a lot of these young white girls, Smart comes to mind, Pamela Smart and a couple other people, when they were missing, they had Amber Alerts, they had false sightings, you know, where they would go to candy stores or gas stations and realize it wasn't the person or somebody who looked similar but it wasn't. They're actively out there trying to find these people. People of color, they're not actively out there trying to find them because of racism. They don't care as much.
Well, you know what? Let's go, I'm going back to the same Central Park situation.
Yes.
I believe a couple of weeks after or a couple of weeks before, there was a black woman that also was attacked in the park.
Correct.
And nobody ever heard about that incident.
Guys like you and I, Lady Pauline, who's a journalist, we hear about those things and we talk about them. But if you go to the average citizenry who heard ad infinitum and ad nauseum about the so-called Central Park rape victim, they know about her, the young banking executive who was raped.
Yeah.
Yes.
But they don't know about who you're talking about, and it happened contemporaneously, the
Yeah.
same month.
Yeah.
Well, this brings me to something else. I think Lady Pauline pointed out that they did solve the Central Park so-called
Yes,
rape case,
they-
right?
that's
Right.
It turned out that it was one person, and you know how they solved it?
No.
Not by interrogating people in the, I guess it was the 24th precinct, I believe, at that time that covered Central Park. Not by beating people in the head with telephone books, which leaves no markings but scrambles your brains on the inside. Okay? Not by
Wow.
threatening to do things to your family. No. But by somebody who simply had a pang of conscience. The actual perpetrator, which was a Latin male, who was serving, I think, 25 years to life in an upstate New York State prison.
For something else?
For something else. I think it was murder. Years later, like 20 years later, said, you know what? I'm going to confess. And he started making calls and reaching out to the Manhattan County DA's office, to some of the attorneys who were on the original Central Park case, like Alton Maddox on the defense side,
Right.
Tarif, Michael Warren, other of my colleagues at the bar and friends of mine who I know were involved in that case, and telling them he was the perpetrator. If you don't believe me, come test me. Because my DNA. Because there was no, he was an adult, number one, at the time. He was a white Latino. These were all dark-skinned Latins or black young teenagers and children that
Right,
they
that's
convicted
right.
of
That's true.
charges.
Yeah.
He didn't fit their profile at all. He was an adult male and an older adult in his 30s at the time, and had a long arrest record. He was a criminal. And this was a crime of opportunity, as he told it. He said that he just happened to see her and took the opportunity to do what he did, and he beat her over the head with a rock.
And she didn't have no memory.
She had no memory of anything.
Yes.
Primarily, I think because she was beaten over the head and she was taken from behind. So I don't think she ever saw the perpetrator, and the rock did the rest. However, his DNA actually did match. He was telling the truth.
Wow.
It was his DNA all over the crime scene. But there was no effort, no indication it was him, even though his DNA profile was in the database.
Which should have been in the database, right?
Right, because he
Yeah,
was
as
a criminal, right. And at the time was in prison on a major felony. Now they DNA you on any criminal conviction, whether it's jaywalking. If you are convicted of a criminal act, B misdemeanor and above, they're going to take your DNA. But even then, they took it for felonies, and he was in prison for a felony. So there was a falling down, a dropping of the ball, if you will, on the part of the government and its investigators and prosecution team in this case, because they felt we got 5, 6, we're good.
So as an attorney, would you say that so many cases that you hear about are not solved, and they're not solved correctly, and people are going to jail and they are not the perpetrators?
Well,
And what happens to these families?
Ev-
How do you regain the structure after you have torn apart a family?
multifaceted question, multi-pronged, excellent questions. The first part of that I want to take, the first one you raised was, are people being wrongfully convicted? The answer is absolutely yes. How do we know? Well, we know that because beginning about 10 years ago, when there was a young black male who became the district attorney in Brooklyn County, my former employer, the former office where I worked, the Brooklyn DA's office, he took over after winning the seat from the then current DA, the former DA who ran again and lost to this young black male. This young black man, when he got into the DA's office, decided that he was going to clean house. And what he did was, one of the first acts he did amongst any of the DAs in the city of New York was formulate a task force to review possible wrong convictions. And when he did have this task force start this review, they didn't expect to find maybe a dozen or two. They found hundreds of wrongfully convicted. Hundreds in Brooklyn alone.
Wow.
Joe Hines was the previous
Yes.
DA in Brooklyn, and he lost to this young man. The same young man who had represented the woman who was raped, as it turned out, in a high-class Manhattan hotel by the head of the IMF at the time. It was a very big
right,
scandal.
yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
She was a maid,
Maid,
young
yes.
African
Oh,
maid.
yes, I remember the case.
The young man who represented her ran against Joe Hines off the heels of that publicity in that case and became DA, the first black, well, if you want to count Robert Johnson in the Bronx, but the first actively black,
For Brooklyn anyway, right?
Brooklyn for sure,
Yeah.
in the city of New York. And he began that task force to review the possible wrong convictions committed by his office, but the previous DA, and found a lot of problems, found a lot of people in state prison who were wrongfully convicted. So then Manhattan, under Cyrus Vance Jr., to his credit, formulated the same task force because I guess he figured, well, if that can happen there, let me check Robert Morgenthau's past,
Right.
which was the previous DA in Manhattan. And he too found a lot of wrongful convictions, and to this day, people are being exonerated and released from all kinds of situations, whether it be DNA that was falsely or wrongfully used, or false testimony by police officers. There's one particular in Manhattan who they say set up about 35 people. They had to release, who were doing 25 to life on murders because he was a homicide detective. And he said that there was a problem with all of his cases. Lying, paying off witnesses, threatening defendants, all kinds of underhanded, unlawful tactics to get convictions. So all of those had to be overturned. That was in Manhattan. In Brooklyn, there were a lot of people who were put away, who were underage, who weren't, again, parents weren't informed when they were interrogated. Lawyers were misdirected to other places when their client was here, told he's at another precinct, given the runaround to buy time for the police to interrogate. So all of that stuff started to come out. So Brooklyn had about 400 immediately within the first 6 months. I think Manhattan had over 300 wrongfully convicted, and they're still finding, if you will, bodies. Still finding bodies up in state prison. So,
So what would you say now to the attorneys now that has held those cases and their client was sent to jail wrongfully? So they didn't really do a good job.
well, your attorney can only be as good as the prosecution and police are in following the law. In other words, if the attorney is saying in his moving papers, give me the circumstances of the arrest, give me the circumstances of the confession, should there be a confession, give me the probable cause you had to stop the car, to enter the apartment, let me know what were the police tactics in eliciting the information from the witnesses. So if your attorney does his job, which is doing that type of motion practice work, and the answers he gets or she gets are lies, well then they're not playing by the rules. So the attorney is hamstrung if the court system itself is broken down. And that's what we saw in many of those cases where the court system was broken down. Because of course there's a judge who can make the DA's office turn over certain information. For example, if the DA is not turning over information about a witness who made a statement that is exculpatory to a defendant.
Is what?
Exculpatory. In other words,
What does that
mean? The DA interviews 5 witnesses.
Right.
3 of them say, yes, definitely Joe was there. 2 of them say, no, I know Joe and Joe was not there. In fact, the person who was there was so-and-so and so-and-so. But that doesn't fit the DA's theory of the case.
So they
you
throw it
never,
out?
well, you never hear about it. It gets buried. That's not playing by the rules.
Right.
So I wouldn't really blame the defense attorney for convictions like that, because that's why you don't see defense attorneys getting sued when they get convictions like that. You see them suing the state. They sue us, the citizenry, not the attorney.
Now, I heard something that was pretty shocking. I was at a criminal justice talk
Yeah.
at the Black Family Empowerment Summit a couple weeks ago. And one of the things that was said was that out in Long Island, for example, they don't arrest young kids for smoking pot or drinking in a parking lot or so on and so forth, because they'll have a record. However, the marijuana laws are now lessened, but we've been tracking, and part of what has been occurring is that the number of, in fact, we just had a public safety presentation at Queens Library just past Monday with the police commissioner. And one of the things that they talked about, I think Councilman Donovan Richards talked about it because he's heads up that particular committee.
Okay.
Talked about the fact that there were biasness in terms of black and brown youth.
At the street level, the decision-making patterns of the police at the street level are based on bias.
Yes.
So they determine, do I take this kid home to his parents, or do I take him to central booking to jail?
Well, interestingly enough, someone, a captain or precinct captain from Nassau County came in and talked to some folks in the city, in New York City system, and said, we would never do that because we understand the implications
And ramifications.
even if they're not guilty. Just
Right.
the fact that their process now puts them in the system, and why would you put a young person in the system
Right.
for something minor that's going to be
A
carried
major
forward?
effect on their life.
Yeah.
Correct. And
Yeah.
they're going to be explaining it ad infinitum before they even get started in life on jobs, etc., college applications, etc. So I agree with that logic, but it wasn't always put that way.
Right.
Do you ever feel that the system is so broken that it can't be fixed?
No, I think that the system on paper works the way it's written. The problem is implementation
The
and
enforcement,
execution
yeah.
of the system. In other words, for example, if they say no one is above the law, but yet you see police run the lights, don't stop, are discourteous to people, you know, if that is stemmed, policing could be better.
Right,
Correct.
right.
If disrespect to the citizenry is checked by supervising officers, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, etc., it'll be better.
So there's not enough check and balance then?
Well, it's not enough enforcement of it because how many times have we seen on Facebook, on the news, a bad officer show up, do something crazy, and 5 or 6 officers just standing around, not participating in his crazy,
But
but
looking.
also not
But
stopping
Stop
him.
not
it,
stopping
stop it.
him, yes.
That's the problem.
Him or her, right.
Him or her. Usually it's a him,
Yeah.
a white him. But that's the problem.
Okay.
It's not that the rules, the way they're written, are the problem. It's not like they don't know these things exist. It's just that I don't know what it is in them that says, let them get away with it. And then cover it, lie for them. I don't understand what that
Well,
system is in their mind, what becomes in their mentality after the academy.
there's a citizen review board or something.
CCRB, Civilian Complaint Review Board.
Is that effective?
In 90% of the time, absolutely no. In the trial I just did, it's funny and interesting you should raise that, Glenn. In the trial that I just did, 2 of the 4 members of the New York City Police Department had extensive CCRB, Civilian Complaint Review Board, accusations and convictions, what they call substantiated charges.
Oh, really? So,
Yes.
so say a little bit more about that. So what does that
I
mean?
will. So in the trial that I just completed, winning, I raised those questions during their cross-examination. They were witnesses for the prosecution trying to help prosecute my client.
Right.
They didn't know I knew their CCRB background, which I did. I had it right in my hands. So I asked them, one of them, Officer so-and-so, his name was, I can't remember, Crowley or something. Did you ever, at first I rattled off the names, the 4 names of the victims of his that were in the CCRB complaints that were substantiated. In other words, that he was found guilty of violating or abusing in this case. He said he didn't recognize the names. So then
really?
Yes, he did. So then I said, were you the subject of 1 or 2 or 3 or even 4 Civilian Complaint Review Board prosecutions and convictions, charges that were substantiated? Now keep in mind, the CCRB very, very rarely prosecutes these cops. They usually have no finding of wrongdoing from the top.
They just write it off.
Correct.
Yeah.
But when they do have a finding, it's even rarer that they get convictions.
Okay.
This guy had 4 in maybe a 4 or 5 year career,
Wow.
and he couldn't remember any of them.
Of course
See,
not.
these are the type of things that help me, because I look at the jury later on in summation and I say, is he credible? If it were you, if it were me as an attorney, and I had 4 or 5 charges of wrongdoing brought up against me to the bar by my clients, you think I would forget that?
Of course not.
Okay.
No, it should
And
be
I
on
was
the top of
practicing
their list.
right, and you're gonna always remember that, even if it's one that's not founded, because it's gonna burn you in your heart and your mind that somebody tried to get you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if they got you 4 times, how can you tell me that I'm gonna forget? And I've been practicing 32 years. This guy's only been a cop for maybe 12 total.
Yeah.
And these complaints came all within the last, since even not today, but 3 years ago. So he was only practicing, a cop for maybe 9 years at that point.
Yeah.
So they didn't find that credible. And I said, further with him, I said, he didn't remember anything. So I said, let me show you a document, which was a CCRB conviction sheet from the Civilian Complaint Review Board. Not from me, not from my office. I didn't make it. I put it under his nose on the witness stand, and I said, Officer Krumke, does that document, take a look at the document before you. He looks at it. And he's looking. And I said, okay. He looks up. I said, look up at me when you're done. And he looks up. I said, now, does that document refresh your recollection as to whether or not you were the subject of a CCRB investigation 1, 2, 3, or maybe even 4 times? He said no. So I came up to him, grabbed the paper, and started reading it.
Oh, okay.
All the abuse allegations, the victims, and the conclusions of the CCRB. He fell out. The judge didn't want me to read it, but he lied and said he didn't know and had it in front of me. They still didn't help him remember. So when I read it to him, the jury, like you guys, were looking saying, so you tried to lie to us. Even, first of all, it's not credible that you wouldn't remember these complaints against you. Second, it's not credible that you wouldn't remember how many were against you. And thirdly, you don't remember it while it's in front of you. He's showing it to you on paper and you still doesn't jog your memory? He doesn't recall. So that was one. The other one, which was the father of the so-called victim, said, when I brought out his CCRB complaints, he was a sergeant in this case, said, well, that's part of being a cop. Everybody gets them.
Oh, everybody.
I loved that answer. I stopped right there. I didn't even try to impeach him any further. I didn't pick out any paper. I said, oh, really? Thank you. Closing, I went to the jury and I said, do you remember Sergeant Cruz? He's the one who came in here and told us that that's just part of being a cop. Abusing the citizenry, being brought up on charges by the CCRB and convicted, he shrugged it off as just part of being a cop.
Wow.
Do you want to run up into Officer Cruz's path late night as a citizen and he's a cop on the street and it's just you and him?
No.
No.
That was the question I left them with about Officer Cruz. That's how I do my law, by the way. Oh, praise to God.
You're listening to Caribbean Buzz, our world, hour of power, hour.
Amen to that. And I'm your attorney and co-host, attorney at law, Stephen G. James, and
Glenn Greenwich, they call me the mayor of Suffern Boulevard.
And they call me Lady Pauline.
otherwise known as the man and woman of the hour, the ones with the power who are often too sweet to be sour. This is
Lady Pauline.
Glenn Greenwich.
And we're on Caribbean Buzz TV and radio. Hit me.
All right. Also, you can also check us out on Spotify. We're also on iTunes, TuneIn, Facebook. So please, there's many different platforms that you can hear our show, but specifically look for Spotify. It's very current, and if you miss any of our shows, you can always play them back at a later date.
And I believe we're also on YouTube, if I'm not in error.
Oh, yeah,
Don't forget
that's right.
YouTube. A lot of people tune into that, right?
That's true, yes.
You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, TuneIn, Caribbean Buzz TV, and radio, and of course, Face Boogie Woogie.
Our world, our power. Thank you all for listening. Catch you next week, Saturday, from 5 to 6.
And for tomorrow, for Mother's Day, all the mothers out there and the mothers to be, we're wishing you the very, very best.
Happy Mother's Day to all you mothers out there as well. This is a very special time of year, although we are of the belief, I think I speak for all three of us when I say every day is Mother's Day, because without you, Mom, there'd be no we, there'd be no us. There'd be no Mother Earth, there'd be nothing. So I want to thank all the mothers who promulgate and help to inhabit the planet. Thank you for being who you are, amen, and we cannot live without you. Happy Mother's Day, ladies.
Peace and blessings.
Enjoy your Mother's Days, ladies.